There's a lot to be said about communicating effectively, but this is only an hour-long theme, so the focus is on specifically communicating with children who've experienced separations, loss, and trauma, because trust will also be an issue. Children communicate differently than adults and differently at various age ranges, so we wanted to provide information about that, especially when talking about sensitive subjects from their backgrounds. Now let's talk about the nuts and bolts in this theme. The theme starts with the key elements of effective communication. So you'll go through a series of slides that discusses that. This is where you'll layer in communicating with younger children versus teens. Know that the featured resource for this theme is a video in the resource section on younger children and the importance of play as a tool to communicate with them. You'll then play a 6-minute video with Heather Forbes, who's a therapist and mom of children impacted by trauma. It gives tips to participants on how to communicate with children and teens and how to model good communication for them. This will be followed by a discussion about what children need and practical tips for caregivers. The next section explores the need to address difficult topics with children, and the section has a short activity where participants identify topics that might be difficult to talk about with children. Then you'll delve further into the how and when of talking with children by showing a video with Bruce Perry as he talks about the 4 Ps of communicating. The last section is where you'll spend a bulk of class time on an activity called the Darius Case Study, where participants get a chance to think about talking with a child as he grows about questions he has about his mother. For this activity, you'll read a vignette and have participants use a handout to choose what they might say to a child if he asks about his mother. You'll do the activity with Darius at 3 different age ranges to demonstrate how to fill the story out over time. This will give you the chance to educate participants about when and why children need more or less information. The key takeaways in this theme are that communicating with children is not the same as communicating with adults. Communicating with children who've experienced separations, loss, and trauma requires more than talking. Our ability to listen, our body language, our tone of voice, and conveying empathy all matter. We have to discuss sensitive subjects with children who've been hurt. They'll need help from their parents and caregivers to understand the information, and this will need to happen over time as they can tolerate it and as they mature. There are no shortcuts. This is not a one and done. Now let's talk about where you might get tripped up in facilitating this theme. The first is the difficult topics activity. Participants may not know what to say when you ask about difficult topics, so you may need to give an example or 2 to get them going. Be sure to round out the list with even the most sensitive topics. Don't avoid those, like talking to a child who's observed sexual acts and has questions about it. If our parents can't talk about it in a class, they won't be comfortable enough to talk about it later with kids. If participants are challenged, remind them that we can all give ourselves grace with these topics. Most people are not comfortable with all of them for personal reasons, and that's okay, as long as we realize it and we have a plan for how we can talk with kids if they need us to address any of these topics later. It's always okay to get help from others to have these conversations, like a parenting partner, a therapist, or a trusted friend. So make sure they know that, and do that for yourself if you need it. It might actually bring a child and a parent closer if they acknowledge how hard it is to talk about, and might bring you closer to your participants if you acknowledge that. Another spot that might get challenging is the Darius role play. We constructed the activity in 3 parts because people often don't realize that they need to talk about a child's story at different age levels and different ways each time. We really want to hit home how important it is to discuss sensitive subjects over time, because a child's understandings and questions arise over time and they change. This is an area where knowledge is power. And while this theme is short, participants will have their eyes opened about how to talk with kids and also what to talk about. While this content may seem obvious to you, this is an area of a great amount of questions for parents later, and one of the most needed areas reported by adults who were in foster care or adopted. You might not get to see the benefits of this content play out in class, but I assure you, It pays off again and again over time. This theme really matters because it dispels myths and develops comfort long into the future.